Hashem Boker Tov. Today's Daf Yomi is Zevachim Daf Tzadi Dalet 94, but we're going to start the Mishnah on the bottom of Tzadi Gimel on the base. It says the Mishnah, we're discussing that if blood got on a garment, it's the blood of the chatas, that there's an obligation to wipe it out. So it's nitas ala or if it fell on the hide, actual chuvshat before it was skinned off, enoton kibus. Before it's still on the animal, it does not require kibus. And we're going to explain because we require ro'el kabel tuma below chisara malacha, as Rashi said. It needs to be capable of contracting tuma without doing any work, and that means capable of contracting tuma means it needs to be a finished object. And since it needs to be skinned, it's obviously not a finished object yet. Misha huvsha ton kibus, but once it's skinned, then it requires kibus. According to Rabbi Yehuda, because then it would skin, and so now it could easily be a garment or an item used. Whereas Rabbi Lezer Omer Afmi Shahuvshut, Rabbi Lezer says even when it's skinned, it's still not requiring kibus, because as long as the person has the mindset, doesn't yet have the mindset that it's an item that is going to be used, like garment or utensil, then it's not makabel tumah. It means, say, Rebbe Lazar's of the position, even if it's just missing the mindset, then it's not makabel tumah. Whereas Rabbi Yehuda says, as long as it's only missing the machshava, the mindset, then at that point you have to wash it out because it's makabel tumah. So we'll discuss that more in the Gemara. Enotam kibus el makom adam. The only place that requires the washing is the place for the blood. The davar shel royal kabel tumah. Just it needs to be something that is ro'el kabel tumah. Meaning, say, even if it's missing the machshava, as long as it's not missing the malacha. And the Gemara is going to point out that this is like the stomach, the synonymous statement is like Rabbi Yehuda. The royal kibus, and it has to be capable of kibus. And the Gemara is going to say, what's that coming to exclude? Whether it's the garment or whether it's the sackcloth, which Rashi says is made out of goat hair, the garment's made out of wool or flax, or wool or linen. So either it's the garment or the sackcloth or echada or leather to unin kibus. They all require this kibus, this laundering. Kibus b'makom kodesh, the kibus has to take place in the holy place, i.e. the courtyard of the temple. Mishviras kli charis, and if you have a pottery utensil, and if it had absorbed the flavor of the kodesh kodeshim, then since the flavor can't come out, you need to break the pottery utensil, and you do that b'makom kodesh, because otherwise it'll have the non-kosher flavor absorbed in it. Umariko shtifa, but if it's a copper pot, and so therefore you have to kosher it through scourging, then b'klina choshes b'makom kodesh, also in the courtyard. Zechomer b'chatos min kodesh kodeshim. This is the stringency of the chatos over other kodesh kodeshim, that there's this requirement to wash out the blood. Minani Mili, where do we know the halacha of all these halachos that the obligation to wipe out the blood only is when it's on a garment? To turn rabbanan beged eliyah beged minayel rabbas or mishov. How do we know it comes to include not only a clothing, but also like not only fabric but also leather once it was skinned? Tamomer asher yizeh olah. Or I might think include even the leather before it was skinned. Tell me one more, the beged. Ma beged a royal kabel tumah. I've called royal kabel tumah. It has to be capable of contracting tumah without missing any physical work. That's Rabbi Yehuda's position. Whereas Rabbi Lezer says beged eliyah beged minayel rabo sak. He says no, the garment includes. How do we know it includes sackcloth, which is wool and linen? The kol minei begadim and all other types of garments. What's that coming to include? Rashi says like silk or other types of fabrics. Talmud Lomar on the top of 94a, asher aleha techabes. It's not exactly the pasuk is asher yizeh aleha, but close enough. Anything that's on it, you shall wash. Yachal shani marba or mishav shad. I might think to include even the hide once it's skinned. Talmud Lomar beged. Ma beged davar al mekabel tumah. I've called davar al mekabel tumah. It has to be something that's capable of contracting tumah, and it's not missing any machshava. Whereas Rabbi Yehuda says if it's just missing the machshava, it's royal kabel tumah, that can easily be mekabel tumah. Now we're going to say under those circumstances, it does need to be washed out. But according to Rabbi Lazar, it has to be complete, even not missing any machshava. And so therefore, it has to be capable right now of contracting tumah. Maybe now. So what's the distinction? Let's give a practical distinction between Rabbi Yehuda, who says as long as it's raw, you have to wash it out, and Rabbi Lazar says it has to be right now a finished product. What's the distinction between them? The Gemara is going to give three possible nafkaminas. Amar Abaye, matlas bechusa mishalosh. Let's say you have a small piece of fabric smaller than 3 tefachim. So so it's generally speaking, manda amar roi, one who says it's roi, as long as it's roi, you have to wash it out. So haname roi. Then even though this small piece of fabric right now is not used for anything, but it could easily be used for something if you have in mind to use it as a patch. Because if you want, you could, in your mind, assume that it's being used as a patch, and then it'll be mekabel tuma. Man damar davar mekabel tuma. When it says no, as long as it's right now mekabel tuma, hamia la bas kibui tuma. Right now, since you don't intend to, you're not having any use for it. It's right now not something that's mekabel tuma. A second explanation is from Rava. So the first one's from Baya. Rava says, "Beged shachisha v'la tzura." Let's say you have in mind to make you have a garment, but it's not completed. You want to make like an embroidery on it, make a design on it. So it's not yet complete. Mandama roy, hanami roy. One who says roy, well, this case is also roy because you could just have in mind to use it right now easily without doing the tzura on it. Manda amar because if he wants to, we could cancel his thought and just use it as the garment. According to Rabbi Lazar, it says that's to be something that's capable of contracting tumah right now. Right now, you intend to finish the garment; it's not yet finished, so therefore, it's not yet mekabel tumah. And then Ikadami, another version of Rava, is Rava says utzpa dechashav. Let's say you have like a mat that you sleep on or you sit on. Basically like a carpet. Most of them were made out of leather. Some were made out of fabric, Rashi says, and you have in mind to cut it down, to trim it more. So mandam roy, hanami ruya, and one who says roy, well, you can use it right now. Mandam davar mekabel tuma, halam mekabel tuma adam mekatzla. You have intended to cut it, and it's not yet cut, and so therefore it's not yet mekabel tuma. And the Gemara cites a brayso to support this position. Even though if there's like a carpet that you have intent, and your intent is to cut it down, it's going to be tahora until you actually cut it down. Until you cut it down, it's not yet mekabel tuma. Okay, so then we said in our Mishnah that if it is something, the only place that requires the washing is the makom adam. The only place that requires the washing is the place of the blood itself. How do we know this idea? Let's say it went on a portion of the garment. Some might think that the whole garment requires laundering. Like, for example, if a little bit of the pot became non-kosher, you have to kosher the whole pot. So I might think you have to immerse the whole garment or cleanse the whole garment. So it says, Asher Yizeh, the Pasuk says, the only place that needs to be cleansed is the place of the blood itself. Boker Tov, we're in the middle of 94a. So then the Gemara says, Davar shel roy lekabel tumah. And then our Mishnah said, it only applies to something it applies to something as long as it's roy lekabel tumah, which we identified as something that it could easily be finished if you just change your mindset about the matter. And that was the position of Rabbi Yehuda, and not like Rabbi Elazar. And so now the Gemara is telling us that this position that's repeated in our Mishnah is stama to Rabbi Yehuda. That Rabbi Yehuda Nasi, when he edited the Mishnah, he sometimes went back and did an anonymous, and he shows which one he favors. So he's favoring the position of Rabbi Yehuda, and so that as long as it's roy lekabel tumah, as long as it's capable in the future of contracting tumah by changing your mindset. Roy lekibus, and then we said as long as it's capable of kibus, l'miyute, what's it coming to exclude? That it only applies to something that is capable of washing, of laundering. L'miyute kli debar gredahu. So this comes to include the utensil that you don't wash, but you scrape it away. So there's like a wooden utensil or metal utensil that if some of the blood of chatos falls on them, They don't require kibbutz because this is something that you just scrape it away and then it goes away. But a garment, you can't just scrape it away, it goes in. And so then you have to wash it out or launder it. And then we said in our Mishnah, whether it's a garment or a sackcloth or leather, then it requires kibbutz. All those cases require this laundering. So now the Gemara says, Lamema de or bar kibbutz. So you mean to say that leather is something that you launder? So viraminu. And now the Gemara says, but what about the case that we have in Masechah Shabbos? It says in the Mishnah Masechah Shabbos. Now on Shabbos, there's now you have to wash out the clothing, the blood. But on Shabbos, you're not allowed to do kibbutz. You're not allowed to do laundry. So we learned Haisalav Lashlashes. Mekamcha Bismartut. Let's say there was on, let's say, a pillow or a blanket. It says the Mishnah in Shabbos. There was something disgusting on it. Let's say some saliva or some feces. So you're allowed to clean it out with like a rag on Shabbos. And you don't, Rashi says, you don't put on water to get it out because that's doing kibbutz. That's laundering. And kibbutz is av melacha. And that's melabing, like bleaching. But if it was, but if this dirt was on Rashi, I'm reading Rashi, it was on a pillow or blanket or mattress of leather, then you can, then what you could do is you could put on a little water until it goes away, and then you rub it with your hand. Excuse me, not with your hand. You could pour some water on it. And in fact, it says that you could put on the leather a little bit of water. Then we see from here that leather, the prohibition of kibbutz does not require that there's no prohibition of kibbutz on leather. So okay. So the Gemara says, hold on one second. Okay, so the Gemara, and so that's the question. You're saying our Mishnah says that leather is a garment that you have to launder, but on Shabbos we say there's no laundry on leather. You could put water on the leather and wash it away. So it's not, obviously there's no prohibition of kibbutz on leather. So why are you saying here that you need to wash it? So Rabbi says not a difficulty, that this is a dispute between the Rabbanon and the Acherim, whether or not leather is considered something that has kibbutz on it. Tanya, begav asak, nechabso bekli, or megaro. So it says in the Brisa says about the blood of the chatos, that if the blood of the chatos falls on a garment or a sack, then you wash it. But if it's leather, you scrape it away. So that's not like our Mishnah. And so the position in Shabbos is like this Rabbanan, but Acherim Orim, Abeged Vasakva or Mechabso Vakli Megaro. So basically, our Mishnah is like the position of Acherim. And we said also, I think in Shas that Acherim is always Rabbi Meir. I think so. You have to check. But the Rabbanan holds like the Mishnah in Shabbos. So the Gemara says, so now we have a story, which, remember this story because it's going to appear 4 times in the next Amud. 4 times. He says that Rav Chia bar Ashi says, Zimnin Sagian have a kamina kamed the Rav. There was several times I was standing in front of Rav. I was doing shimush on Rav. I was serving my Rebbe. And and I was rubbing off the shoes, but I was rubbing off the leather shoes with water. And he's doing this on Shabbos. So who is this like? So this is like, obviously that you're allowed to do kibbutz on Shabbos. This is, and it's not called kibbutz. That's like the Rabbanon. So Karabanan. Amar Rav Miko Amanda Amar Orlav Bar Kibbusu. But do you really think that the Rabbanon say that leather is not something that there's laundry on? Well, ksiv. It says about the tzaras that if there's a baguette or a shasi or erev or kol kuyor asher techabes, that it says about the concept of tzaras that you wash out the leather. It says very clearly that if there's a garment that's made out of leather, you have to wash it out. So, and then it's purified. So we see from here the leather does have kibbutz. Ela marava kromas nisin, the pasuk and the Mishnah and the pasuk and our Mishnah, which talks about washing the leather, laundering the leather, that's berachin. That's the soft leather. Kipligi, where is there a dispute between the Rabbanon and the Acherim, where the Acherim say that you wash it and the Rabbanon say you don't? That's becushion. That's by hard leather. Amarav. Now, second time, Amarav Kriya, Zimnin Sagin, have a Kamina Kamedura, Avishachim, Messiah, B'maya Bekashin, and he would wash off the shoes on Shabbos, so he cleaned the leather shoes. Yeah, that case is talking about Bekashin. That's talking about hard leather where there's no kibbutz k'Rabbanon, and like the Rabbanon, but according to Acherim, it wouldn't be allowed. Hadar Amarava. Then Rava said, Lav Milsahida Amri. He says, actually, everything I said is wrong. It's not correct. Neku nema Kesiven berachim. Kesiven, do you think that when the Torah said that you have to do laundry on the leather, it's only by soft leather? Milo skin and art. Isn't it possible that the pasuk is also talking about bekli achsalagia with the leather, with the hard leather utensils? They come from overseas. They could also get tzarats. The kamarachban only buy a kibbutz. So we see that the Torah also requires kibbutz on hard leather. So therefore, there's no position that would say hard leather does not require kibbutz. Elam arava, that's by tsaras. Don't bring me a proof from tsaras. Kivin de migufe kaparcha, since the tsaras is coming out from the garment itself, it's not external. So it basically goes throughout the whole thing, and it makes the whole garment as though it's soft, and it spreads throughout it. So therefore, the pasuk is talking about even by hard leather. But our Mishnah, which says that which says that you have to clean the leather, that's by soft, and by hard leather, that's a dispute. But don't bring me a question from the pasuk about saras. Amarava ikashui hakashuli. So Rava says, if it was difficult for me, if I have a problem, this is my problem. Karim, tar is what you sleep on, and a kesed is what you put your head on. So you basically, karim uksasos derachaninu. Karim and uksasos are both called soft, meaning to say you don't make them from a hard leather, only from soft leather, because you're sleeping on it. You don't want to sleep on hard leather. V'tanan, and we learned in the Mishnah, Haizer shel or, no sinoam mayim ad sheticha, and we learned in the Mishnah on Shabbos that if they're of leather and they had this lashleshus on it, this feces, you put water on it and you wash it off. So our Mishnah is saying specifically you're allowed to do it. Ela marava kol kibus delei kiskus lo shmei kibus. So any laundering where you're not rubbing it together, that's what Rashi says, kiderach hamachabes begadim. That's how they would used to launder their garments. They would take the garments in two hands and rub them together. Not like us, we just stick it in a washing machine. It was a very hard task. So if you're not doing that, that's not called laundry. And so they were just putting the water on the leather. That's not called laundry. So kol kibus delays like kiskus lo shmei kiskus. And so therefore they're allowed to do this. And Hadam Rav Chia Barashi Zimnin Sagia v'Kamina Kamei Rav Shachshichalei Misani b'Maya. That's what he would do. Shich Shochin of Kibuso, and that was the third time we're mentioning the story. What would he do when he would wash off the leather, the shoes on Shabbos? He would shine his shoes on Shabbos. That's because he would be just wiping it down with a rag. He'd be like shining them, but he wouldn't actually be rubbing them together. So that's wait. Let me actually read it properly. It says Zimnin Sagi and Avakamina Kamedarav is Shachshichalei Misani b'Maya, and I would rub it down with water. Shich Shachin Avokibaslo. I would rub it down with water, but I would wipe it down with water, but I wouldn't rub it together. And so how do we explain that? Ibarakin Kedivrekol. If it's soft leather, everybody would say that that's only allowed to just wipe it down and not rub it together. And Ibakashin. And if it's hard leather, then I would say, and ukacherim. And if there was hard leather, and maybe, and you might have thought it's not allowed under those circumstances to wash it, that's only like the position of the acherim who say that even by hard leather there's kibbutz. But according to the Rabbanan, there's no kibbutz at all. If that's the case, beg and nami. So if we're going to say, says the Gemara, if that fact that wondering that there's no kibbutz, boker tov, boker tov. So here, give Yehuda Gemara right there. So the Gemara says, if you want to say, like we're just saying that the kibbutz, that there's no, but Jeff, did you drive here this morning? I know you staying for the daf after. You're going. Do you mind dropping off Yehudi? He's in the Blairs. Is that? Or if you're on a tight schedule, I could ask somebody else. Actually, I just realized you're on a tight schedule. No, we'll get someone else. I just realized you have to catch a train or something or a bus. Okay, so don't worry, we got you, Yehuda. We got you. Okay, so Gemara says, Iachi beganami shriyaso zel kibuso. So the Gemara says, well, if that's the case, a garment. Well, Iachi beganami. If that's the case, that the kibbutz that there's no kibbutz is not kibbutz, that it's not wandering, also a garment. That if you don't rub the two sides together, it's not kibbutz. So why do we learn in Shabbos that when it comes to cleaning off the lashleshes, the feces that's on the garment, you're that you can only wipe it with a cloth and you can't put water on it? That's not kibbutz. The Gemara says, well, there's a difference between how you wash your leather and how you wash your garments. Baggage also zel kibbutz. So with a garment, soaking it in the water, that's called the kibbutz. By leather, it's rubbing it. But by a garment, it's just putting water on it. That's how you launder it. V'ravo tameid amarava zarak sudar l'mayim chayev. Zarak zera pishto l'mayim chayev. So and Rava follows his logic because Rava says that if you throw a sudar, what's a sudar? Like a scarf, let's say woolen scarf. You throw it in the water, you're liable. If you throw the zera or the pishtin, l'mayim chayev. If you throw the seeds of the seeds of the flax seeds into the water, you're chayev. Now the Gemara says, Bishlama makes sense to say sudar of a kibbutz. I understand why you throw the scarf in your liable because that's how you wash it. Elazera pishtin, how are you washing the flax seed? My time of if you want to say because when you throw it in, it goes through this process called mikadeach, because basically the seeds sprout in the water to some degree. So why just flax seeds are you liable for? Also, the wheat and the barley seeds. So the Gemara says the distinction is that the flax seeds, this is how they would get the strings out of it. Hanach islu riri. That this is how they would make the threads. They would put the seeds in the water, and then you'd be liable on Shabbos for making like these threads. Well, if that's the case, also if you put like raw hides into the water, you should be liable because they have these threads that come out. The Gemara says, no, the distinction is when you throw the seeds in, the Zerapishtin, Kavod Lisha, you're basically doing the prohibition of Lisha, which is like kneading something together because they get attached to each other when you put them in the water. So Darash Rava, Mutter L'chabes, Minal B'Shabbos. So you're allowed, says Rava, you're allowed to basically wash your shoes on Shabbos. Amar Papa Rava, but really, is that really the case? And now we have the fourth time on this daf that we have this story. We should know it by heart by now. And he basically washed off with a rag. I wiped off the shoes in front of Rav on Shabbos with water. I just could wipe it off, but I didn't do laundry on it. So you see, it's not allowed to wash. So you see from here, you're not allowed to do the laundry on the shoe on Shabbos. You're not allowed to do kibbutz. Different thing, kibbutz, which is, we said, rubbing it together. That you're not allowed to do on Shabbos. You're only allowed to do shich. So, Hadar Uki Rava Morei. So Rava, he was such a big tzaddik, he wasn't afraid to admit that he was wrong. He established an Amora. So generally speaking, we say, what's a Tana? Tana is the authors of the Mishnah. The Amoraim are the players in the Gemara. But an Amora was somebody who stood next to the rabbi who gave the shir. He's a professional voice, professional voice, because they didn't have microphones. They had to people who were excellent at speaking. So Hadar Uki Rava Morale, he got back the Amora, the person whose job it was to speak, and he said Vidarash, and he told him, give this drasha. Dvarim shamarti lefnechem toasem biyadi. He got it as loud as possible. He didn't want to just say he made a mistake. He told the whole world, the things that I said before you was a mistake. Baram kachamru shilchshach mutter kibus answer. You're not allowed to launder your shoes on Shabbos, but you can wipe them down. Hakibus b'makam kadosh. So we said in the Mishnah that laundry and when you clean out the garment, it has to be in the holy place, in the courtyard of the temple. Menon and what's the source? The Tan Rabbanan techabes b'makom kadosh, because it says in the pasuk techabes b'makom kadosh that you have to wash it in the holy place, which is in the courtyard. Shviras kli charas minayin, breaking of the pottery utensil. What is that about? So if they use pottery utensils in the temple, and if they had a kachim, a carbon that went in it, then it absorbed the flavor into it. So then after the expired time, the flavor that was expired was in the pottery utensil, and you can't kash your pottery utensil, so they have to break them. So where do they break that? In the Azara, in the courtyard of the temple. So there must have been a lot of broken pottery shards. I actually heard yesterday that they found on the Temple Mount something about a menorah, like pottery of a menorah. Did anybody else hear that? Okay, fine. We can look it up. Shviras kucharas minayin tamomar ukucharas asher tivushal bo yishaver. So it says the kucharas that you cooked in, you have to break. That's also the pasuk. Right there in Vayikra. And if it's a copper utensil so that you cooked in the kachim, then it says in the pasuk moraf v'shutaf b'mayim. You have to scourge it, boiling water, boil it out. So that's how you kosher it. Because a copper utensil could kosher. How do we know that it has to be done in the temple, in the courtyard? You can't take it out because then you're taking the meat of the temple outside the temple. So it says the Gemara at the end of the Mishnah, it said, this is the stringency of the chatos over the other kachim, and that stringency is that only the garment they got the blood of the chatos is required to be washed. So it says the Gemara, is this the only stringency of the chatos? I'll give you other stringencies. You want stringencies? I'll give you other stringencies. But what about the fact that we said that there's 5 types of inner chatos panimios, the param never tzibor, the par kohen Mashiach, the sayer avodas kochavim. So what about those that go? They get to go into the sanctuary. So and the chatos doesn't, the regular chatos. The Gemara said no, but chatos achitzonios. I'm talking about the chatos achitzonios, the chatos that are eaten in the courtyard, and their blood is applied on the courtyard and the mizbeach. Those are the strings. That's the stringency I'm talking about. What about the fact dama lifnim pisua? What about the fact that if you bring the blood of the chatos into the sanctuary, it's disqualified? The Gemara says, why don't you establish this stringency? So the Gemara says, no, Rabbi Akiva. No, this mission is like Rabbi Akiva. It says, kol damim any blood. Not just the chatos, any blood of any carbon that's not supposed to go into the sanctuary, and you bring it in with the intent to be mechaper is disqualified. She came mechaperin. What about the third possibility? She came a third stringency of the chatos. She came mechaperin al chayve krisos. The chatos is an atonement if you did a kares penalty accidentally. So why don't we list that as the stringency of the chatos? No, because there's the chatos that you bring even though it's not kares. The chatos dishmias akol. We're talking about the chatos. There's a chatos of shmias hakol where you're not going to be liable. What's the chatos of shmias hakol? The chatos of shmias hakol is the prohibition that you swear that you do not know testimony, and then he knows. Then he has to bring a carbon, and that's called a chatos, and that's also, but that is not a kares penalty, and that it's called chatos of shmias kol. Because he heard the oath that his friend swore that he doesn't know. Basically, he swore that he doesn't know testimony from his friend, and he knows. So that's not an accidental. It's also different than the other chatos, because that's not an accidental sin. he swore completely, so he still has to bring a chatas. So, but that's not kari. So therefore we don't want to say this is the stringency of the chatas. And what about the fact that came to una arba matanos, but the fact that the chatas is applied to has four applications, not two that are four, but four full applications on the altar. Look, Rabbi Shmuel, Damar called Damar Tunan, Damar Matanos. So it's like Rabbi Shmuel who says that all the bloods require four applications. That was the position of Rabbi Shmuel we saw in 53b. That Rabbi Shmuel said, so the position of the Rabbanan, we remember, was said he did two applications and it went to all four corners. Whereas Rabbi Shmuel's position was he did on each corner, he had to do two zrikos. And so therefore he was doing actually four applications on the two corners. Remember that? That was back on Daf Nun Gimel. So that was 40 days ago. So maybe we refresh ourselves about that. Adala Kronos. And what about the fact that the chatas alone goes on the four corners? Where it says, well, according to you, Karen, the chatas itself is the only one that goes on the Karen. Why do you even say four kronos? It's the only one that goes on any Karen. Well, we have to stop. So Gemara says, what about the fact that it applies with the finger? It goes on the corner. It could have mentioned all the stringencies, but only mentions one of them. Okay, we'll stop here. We have to dive in Shachris. Wow, I didn't realize we went so long.